Dr. Langer, tell us what's made you so successful in your career.
Well, depending on how you define what success is, the word that always comes to my mind is the ability to evolve. Particularly in the world that we live in, things are changing. Not only are they changing, but they're changing at an accelerated pace. And I think success is predicated on your ability to be agile, your ability to transform with the changing markets that, and whether or not it's education or business or life, the world's changing quicker and quicker. And I think Darwin said it best, right? Those that survive are the ones that can deal with change.
What advice along these lines would you have for young people who are coming out of school and want to be successful and rise to the top?
Well, again, rising to the top to me is, do you enjoy what you do? Everybody wants to make money at it if we can. But I think it's once again in being, one, be very excited about the change in the world. Be change ready. Don't change for the sake of change. But I think the beauty is that we live in a world where opportunity is greater than it has ever been before. The world is global. Think global all the time. And don't get too comfortable with the way things are. There used to be a saying, if it's not broken, don't fix it. I totally disagree with that. Because if you wait till it's broken, you may be too late.
Because you do work at Columbia University, do you believe that students are being properly trained for this type of flexibility and adaptability?
Well, yeah, and we wouldn't use the word training. That's not our great word. It's more education. It's more about transformation. It's more about maturity and building, as we said in many, many years ago in 1828. It's about the furniture and the discipline of the mind to create great thinkers. And great thinkers are people who can engage in societal issues, business issues, global issues, and be able to create and establish an abstract thinking that allows them to see what is going on in the world and how they can change it for the greater good.
Who have been your mentors throughout your career?
Well, I think there's a few different places. I think somewhere along the line, each and every one of us could probably go back to somebody in an education setting that made a difference. Yeah. And that could be someone that was in grade school. It could be someone in high school. Many of us remember some key people that we've met in college, our professors, which is always a good thing to think about. And that's why so many people end up going back to their universities or giving back to their universities, because of the recognition that somewhere along the line someone said something, taught them something, inspired them in some way, and made a difference. The second one is typically somewhere along the line in business we meet someone who may or may not be a mentor per se, but it's someone that we look at and say, wow, this is somebody that I would like to aspire to be like. And of course, not everybody gets an opportunity to do that. And that's why selecting where we go with our careers and the companies we work for and the people that we associate ourselves with in today's world is a very important thing.
I feel like oftentimes I hear people in my peer group say, it's so hard to find a mentor. How do I find one? Mm-hmm. Do you have advice for how to locate somebody?
Well, it's hard. I mean, one of the big things we have now, even at Columbia, and they're not calling it mentoring these days, it goes back and forth, but a lot of people are looking at coaches. Oh. And that's a tricky thing. I think that it can help to have somebody to talk to. I think having someone independent gives you a little bit more of the trust factor. But life's complicated and decisions are complicated. And I think that one of the things that coaches can help us do is look at ourselves and see ourselves the way people around us see us. But it's not an easy thing, and you have to be careful of legitimacy. There's another aspect that we do at Columbia. In our tech management program, we have 150 top technology mentors. And one of the things I do tell my students is it's not such a bad thing if you don't get along with your mentor. It's not such a bad thing if you see things in your mentor that you think is not necessarily the way you would want to manage and help somebody. Seeing that is also a learning experience. Not everything has to be a positive experience. Those of us that have setbacks or see things we don't like can inspire us to make sure that we don't do that we don't manage that way. So I think that's an important piece for many people who've been executives, probably along the way had to be dealing with people who managed them that they didn't particularly get along with.
I think that's a really good point, especially because a lot of times as a student you expect your professors or your mentors, your teachers to be perfect.
Well, I think the issue is, can we challenge our students? Can we put them in a situation where we're preparing them for a life of never-ending learning, for transforming on a regular basis, to not coming up with very hardcore dualistic thinking processes which tend to feed an unrealistic view of the world sometimes. So it's more, I'd love to use that word, challenge their thinking, as opposed to giving them answers.
What makes a great teacher?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. I think you have to be a student of the discipline that you work in. What do you bring to the table? I think you certainly need to inspire your students to think. I think you need to listen to your students very much. That's an important thing, to hear what they're saying. And I think also to somehow drive excellence in them. I think a lot of us want to be able to be in a class which is challenging, but fair, where people have a voice and can think about what they're learning as it relates to who they are and what they perhaps would want to be. So I think those are some of the concepts that I try to employ when I'm working with my students.
What is the mission of Workforce Opportunity Services?
You know, Workforce is a nonprofit organization. To some, it's a social entrepreneurial organization that is bringing a social change in a number of different areas, one in education. We believe that more and more people will not be able to go away to 4 years of college, that it is economically not feasible. There's an assessment that we need to do in terms of the balance between that furniture and discipline of the mind and skills. We live in a world, whether we agree with it or not, is very skills focused at this point, with tremendous amounts of competition. So we work with what we call underserved populations. That could be a high school graduate or a GED holder who likely will struggle to try to get through a university system from a financial and perhaps a support. We work with veterans coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. We even work with graduates who are coming out who can't find a job and may have a lot of debt. So we're working with these populations, and we are the employer. We are helping them with skills, and at the same time we are working with corporations like Prudential, ADP, Johnson & Johnson, who have needs for diversity, have a commitment to their communities, but it's very, very hard to assimilate that talent alone. So what we do is we find that talent, we design educational programs starting with certificates. We partner with major universities. Yes, Columbia is involved, but we have Rutgers, we have Penn State, we have Georgia Tech, University of Texas, El Paso, the Connecticut system. So we're working with these major universities and funding these types of transitions. And after a certain period of time, our clients, the Prudentials and the ADPs, can then hire away these individuals after they have experience with them, and we give these individuals a chance to grow. And of course, we're giving them what I would call a surrogate relationship. We're like their parents. We help them out financially. We help them out with clothing. We work with their families. So it's a full-blown service operation.
How do you find your talent?
The hard way. We go out there and find it in the trenches. We work closely with the high school systems. We are very much affiliated with the military. We work with universities. We have people that are in the community constantly. We hold open houses. We work with parents. And essentially, we find that talent that matches the needs of these organizations. We're the incubator of that talent, and we can do things that colleges alone cannot do, that corporations alone cannot do, including making interest-free loans or even giving away money to help somebody and their families.
Wow.
It's those little things that make the huge difference. But the other part, and I call it sort of the Burger King model, is we allow companies to have it their way. Do they want to hire right away? Do they have openings? In the interim, we're the employer. And we look like a consulting firm, even though that's not what we are doing. We have people on site to assist the organization in learning how to assimilate this particular talent. And we're creating those ladders of ascent. Our employees get 100% healthcare insurance. They also get tuition benefits going to school at night. We're teaching this group of people to balance school and work because they're not going to be able to go away to 4 years of college. But our kids or our students or our military veterans are graduating with no debt.
Wow.
They're assessing tremendous amounts of experience, and it's a seamless transition in many of these organizations.
What's the business model for setting something like this up? How do you maybe plan to take it to scale? It sounds like something like this will be in great demand in the coming years.
Right. Well, we're growing very rapidly now. I think one thing is we did our proof of concept. It is a systemic model because companies, it's a supply and demand model in that companies are paying a rate for our services. Even though it's not really services, it really is looked upon as program services to continually help develop these individuals to be able to have as much professional independence as they can have. And of course, that's what we all want. We want to be professionally independent. But today, we're in 22 cities. We're in 14 different states, and we're even operating in Europe. So we have a global model to fit the needs of our global customer base. But they're not customers, they're partners. It's an incredible transparency model where our clientele or partners are working closely with us to be able to figure out a systemic transitionary model that supports local communities, provides diversity, and as Carnegie once said, ladders of ascent, the ability for people in this country to continue to grow, to continue to learn, and to continue to be professionally rewarded for their services. That's what we do.
Can you talk just a little bit about some of your successes?
We had a young man who had made some mistakes early in his career and didn't do the work in high school that he should have, did not perhaps perform on the SAT. He's an immigrant. His mother worked very, very hard. And we met him in the Newark school system when Prudential was funding a particular, what we would call a cohort of students. And I went in and we had a meeting with the school district, and I asked each of the people that was interested if they would write me an email as to why we would give them the scholarship to Rutgers. And this young man did that and said that he had made some mistakes, but that if I gave him this chance, that he would not let me down. And this young man got his certificate with us actually through Columbia, eventually was hired by Prudential, enrolled in Rutgers, and became a head of the student IT organization at Rutgers. Went on to get his bachelor's degree, has been promoted several times at Prudential, and is now enrolled in his MBA. Those are the kinds of stories that we want to see. Those are the kinds of things that particularly this country needs to get back. The ability of someone who has little money and can continue to go. We have stories of military veterans that don't know where to go next, what they're going to do, and how this has provided a transformative experience for them to learn and understand what it means to go from military life to a corporate employment situation.
Where do you see this going in the United States with the rising cost of colleges, and how do you see this playing out?
Well, we're working very closely with other academic leaders, particularly in our business schools, Peter Capelli at Wharton School, David Thomas, who's now at Georgetown Business School, and many others. And we see, once again, we're not giving up on the bachelor's degree. But in my case, I had to go to school for 18 years at night until I got my doctorate, because I came from a poor family. My dad was a Teamster truck driver. I got married young. But there was a resiliency and a value there. And because of the competitive forces, having a young person develop skills while they're going to school can be a much more effective systemic solution in our society today. That doesn't mean that there are not going to be people that go away to become attorneys and doctors. But for many of the skills-based learning, many of these young people are going away to college, and it's going to be very difficult for them to compete for jobs. So going through the WOS formula, we bring them in young. We get them the health care they need. We begin to get them to appreciate education and build skills in a corporate world. And as they grow and become more competitive, they're getting their degree at the same time, they're flourishing without a debt. And we think that this is a much better model for a certain part of our population.
You wrote a book called Strategic IT Best Practices for Managers and Executives. Tell us a little bit about this book and why you wrote it.
We have a dilemma in our technology space. One, what we know when we talk to CEOs and board members, if you ask them what is the most important competitive strategic area, they'll say technology. At the same time, if you talk to Russell Reynolds, the executive recruiters or the Korn Ferries, and you ask them the life cycle of a chief information officer, they'll tell you it's 39 months.
Wow.
Now that's a problem. So the most important person, all right, one of the most important competitive advantage people is not professionally lasting very long. Many people will say that in the first year they formulate a plan, in the second year they implement the plan, and in the third year they're gone because the plan didn't quite roll out the way it was supposed to.
Wow.
So one of the things that my colleague and I, Lyle Yorks, wanted to pursue is, what about those CIOs that had gone well beyond that 39-month, that had clearly demonstrated over time that they could be successful in what is considered to be an extraordinarily difficult profession and job with everything changing. And what we found was that there were 23 commonalities among all of those people that we believe represents the key issues as to why there is such a high turnover in that job. And as we expected, as we hypothesized, very few, if any of them, had much to do with their knowledge of technology.
Really?
That's right. It had everything to do with the leadership concepts. And when you look out there in our universities, there are very few programs, if any. I know there's one, it's at Columbia University, in which we're preparing those people to take on that type of role. That was the focus that we had, such an important position, so strategically placed to the success of organizations today, yet are we producing the right type of talent that's ready to take on those jobs?
Who exactly is the target audience for your book, and what do you want them to take away from it?
Well, I think there's a few. One, I would love a lot of CEOs to read it, all right, and get a sense of what they need to do, because we have a real problem by not having governance, that a lot of chief executives are not really clear who the person should be, how to manage this. Should there be a separate person in security? Should there be a separate technology versus information? There's a tremendous amount of confusion out there because of the lack of these things. So we wanted this book to be able to be a handbook in many ways for those individuals. We certainly want it to be for the vast number of chief information officers that might be struggling or aspire to step up to those elite chief information officers that exists. And most important, those that are in their senior management levels that aspire to become chief information officers. And one of the things we know is you really only get one shot at the table.
Really?
So you better make it really, really good. And to, in effect, create the next wave or supply of these technology leaders. And I keep saying technology executives and leaders because I'm not necessarily hung up on whether we call them a chief information officer or a chief technology officer, but who are going to be our leaders, and look at the issues that we're dealing with now. Predictive analytics, security, oh my, that's all we see in the news today, and strategy, but at the same time, you've got to keep the lights on. Everything has to work perfectly. That's an extremely important individual not to have a profession.
And a lot of pressure.
Certainly a lot of pressure.
Directions.
But yet, we have lots of people that have been very successful. But here's a dilemma. When I talk to a lot of the executive recruiting firms, they're telling me that when a big job comes up, it's the same people that are going after it. So that the inventory of that talent is not growing, and it needs to. So the objective of this book was to put that into perspective, to help aspiring young senior managers to understand what it means and what the salient issues are to be successful in that position.
Why is it, do you think, that the pool is not growing?
There's not an education system. I don't necessarily believe that MBAs are focusing enough on the salient issues that are necessary. Our master's degree programs there's not many out there. When you look at the program we run at Columbia, we're probably one of the few that is solely focused on this issue, that provides an incredible mentor network. Nobody else, to my knowledge, has that type of program. There appears to be more focus on the technical issues of innovation than the business realities of how to be successful in implementing that.
So you're trying to marry those two things and equip people for both.
Yes, and we believe we've been successful. Our graduates are now taking on chief information, chief technology, and something else. Many of them are also starting technology-based businesses, all of which is a very big issue today, right? The major universities right now are very, very focused on entrepreneurism because we know as a country that if we don't produce more Googles and Microsofts, we've got a problem. And that almost all of these ventures will be generated from technological innovations.
I'm so curious, what's your take on the Sony Hack?
Well, it's yet another message of the new world that we're in. It's another message of the lack of leadership that we have. It's another message of the ignorance that our executives have in terms of what all this really means. You can have all the laws that you want, but as we say, the cat's out of the bag. And we need to start thinking about what our strategies are going to be, what our education is going to be with the millennials that are coming, who do not have that security mindset. What is this world going to look like? What are going to be the behaviors and maturities of how to deal with technology as part of our lives?
Have we sort of jumped the shark a little bit as far as, you know, younger generations are growing up with this technology? It's like their hands and fingers to them. Do we take it for granted a little bit?
Well, we have a real dilemma organizationally, and I can tell you without mentioning names, there's a number of organizations that I'm working with now. So look at this. Who are the executives of these firms? They're baby boomers. Who are the middle managers? They're Gen X's.
Right.
But the people coming out of colleges, they're the Gen Y millennials.
Yeah.
When you look at those three different sets of skills and thinking patterns, they're quite different.
That's so
And
true.
how do you get those three to work together?
Yeah.
Because the millennials, if not giving the kinds of opportunities that they're looking for, the abilities to change the world and utilize technology, they're going to leave those organizations. And oh, by the way, they happen to be most of the consumers that these organizations are trying to market to.
Yeah.
So it is quite
Wow.
interesting.
I'd love to hear more about what is the difference between learning and training?
Well, training can be seen as something in which we teach somebody to do a repetitive task, right? I can teach you how to operate a machine. I can teach you and train you how to use Lotus or Excel. I can train you to run a car or a bus. Education, on the other hand, is about transformative learning, which is to be able to reflect about what you're doing, to be able to think about new things that you may want to do, to think about better ways in which you're doing it, to develop an abstract mind, which is to say, I know how to do this now, but perhaps there's another way of doing it. It is those latter issues that we're talking about that creates what we would hope to think, certainly at Columbia University, is a learned society that evolves. If I train you to operate something, it doesn't mean you can evolve.
Right.
And I said earlier when we started is that success today is predicated on your ability to continue to grow, to evolve, not in a revolutionary way, but in an evolutionary way. You can't do that if you're just trained, because then you're living in a concrete, dualistic world which basically says, this is the way I was told to do something. Societies grow because they can see something a little bit different.
How do you actually define a learning organization?
A learning organization, the way I've always said it, and we've had this with technology, just say it backwards. A learning organization is an organization that learns by itself, as opposed to being top down. The people inside the organization are constantly learning. They're constantly challenging their own beliefs. They're looking at change that may be coming. They're thinking about what that means to their businesses and their lives. Remember, I said to you is that if you wait too long and you're reacting to something that's broken, most of those organizations will not be successful. Very few of them recover. So you want a learning organization to be one where groups of people in their department are sitting there and saying, is the way we're doing it today going to work tomorrow? And within that comes something that is vitally important in our society today, and that is the growth of a risk model. We're going to be in a world where we're going to need to take more risks. We're going to be living in a world where we're going to try things and not all of them are going to work. And when you look at organizations, they don't really do well in that area. In fact, if you can find a book that says that organizations like to change, I'll buy it today. So you have a collision going on. You have a world that is requiring change and risk, and you have a mentality in most organizations is to be secure, safe, and continue to do what you're doing because it works. That is not a very good plan. And that's why you see so many small companies that dump, that take care and overcome the preeminent companies that are out there. And here's one for you. Out of the original Dow 500, there's only one company that's still there from the original.
Really?
And that's GE.
GE.
So what does that tell you about the evolutionary tendency? Now there are some other problems, right? There's greed, there's short-term thinking, but in the world we're living now, driven by technology, and I have no doubts when all of us are gone, they'll look back in the history books and say two things. One, this was the technology revolution. Maybe they'll say Art was right. I don't know. I hope they do.
I think they will.
But this is going to be known as an era of accelerated, dynamic, and unpredictable results. Think about what that means, and think about the kinds of people you have running organizations today, and how many of them get up in the morning and say, wow, things will change this week, how excited I am. I don't think we see much of that. But the millennials are more adept to that thinking process.
Everyone tends to be very risk averse. How does one build a learning organization? How do you cultivate that attitude?
Well, if you look at all the theories of this, it has struggled in the past because of one major issue. Organizations have goals. Those goals tend to be survival, return on investment, whatever you might call it. So it's very important that we always link organizational learning to outcomes. Okay? What will the learning do? How will that affect outcomes? We use words like strategic performance. Will people be more efficient? Will we sell more? Will we see better results? And some of those things are immediately noticeable, others take a while. But to say we're going to train people because they'll be better people, that doesn't sell to most companies today. And as a result, you've seen that most companies have cut their investment in education. They've pushed that down to their employees and say that's your responsibility.
Right.
Some of that relates to turnover issues. But in a learning organization, what you have are people that not only understand the value of the learning, but always focus on the strategic performance issues. And I believe, and what we've seen, is that if you go to a good executive and you can make that correlation, you're going to get a lot of support.
The next thing is developing how to measure these learning outcomes.
Absolutely.
And can you say a little bit about that and what you're seeing?
Well, I think you need to put processes in place in which, and you need to invest in things where you begin to see the results of the way people behave and what those results are with clients. One of the amazing things that I find with my students, if they're doing an internal project on their master's thesis, I would ask them, well, what's the market for that? I mean, what is the size of the market? And they'd say, well, I don't know, I'm an internal support person. And I'm saying, that's not good enough. You've got to know. We're saying today the customer is closer than you think. So I think it's people who are very much in touch with the end buyer and understanding what it is that they're looking for. And it is that type of transformation through education that is going to make the difference on the success of these companies. And we've seen those, right? We've seen the Nordstroms and we've seen the other companies that cater a lot to their constituents. And everybody has to be in strategy. Everybody has to be in support. Everybody has to aspire to excellence. And the companies that will be able to do that will be the ones that will evolve better and be more successful.
Why do you think it is that so many college students just aren't prepared to enter the workforce today?
I think they've been sold something that is very questionable at this point, which was go get an education, get a good education, and you'll get a job. And I would say that that's pre-technology and globalization. What we're finding now is that organizations will inevitably go where the talent is for the best price. And while I believe very strongly in a democratic education system, a liberal education as we call it, I think that the way that liberal education is distilled in people varies by their needs. If we don't get people to work, we have a problem. If we stop making things as a country, we're going to have problems. How and when we embed a liberal education in people needs to be rethought for various different types of populations. But another way of saying it is that it is the end of the B player, as we call it. Because if you're a B player, I probably can find an A player somewhere else in the world that will do that job and may do it cheaper.
Right.
And again, this is all done through the abilities that technology has afforded us to make the world flatter, right? So these are very, very important issues, and that's what has changed things. I can get that skill in so many different places today, and it doesn't have to be local anymore. And that has created a much more substantial competitive world because of what technology has allowed us to do.
It just makes me wonder, do you think the American dream as a whole is changing?
Oh, not at all. I just think that there is an issue now of agility. Universities have to rethink the way they're doing things. I'm not saying we do away with great books learning. I'm saying perhaps that we do it in a different way for certain individuals. I think we have to be more flexible. And most important, prices have to drop. Our education system is far too expensive. And we have to start thinking of different ways in which that's going to be done. And what we all know, I think we all know, is that online education and hybrid programs will inevitably bring down the price of education. That is a new paradigm that is in front of us. So I predict that education over the next 10 to 20 years is going to go through a major changes.
Do you think that companies that are hiring see online education as just as valuable as, say, a university education that's on site?
Well, I always say that we end up with hybrid things in the world. And I think what you're going to see, which we're experimenting very successfully with right now, is that a portion is face-to-face, a portion is online. The software will become much more sophisticated, the delivery mechanisms will become cheaper, and it will just be a reality of life that these will be the kinds of things that organizations need to continue to compete in the world that we're in. I think you're going to see many more part-time students. 80% of students that are on college campuses today are non-traditional. Where I come from, that's an oxymoron.
What does that mean exactly?
It means that the non-traditional is the majority. So how can a non-traditional person be a majority? If they're the majority, they're the tradition.
Wow.
To some extent.
Yeah.
We're going to have many more people who will be in and out of institutions of higher education in many different ways, and far fewer of them will be spending full time on the campus, simply because of the ability to reach all these people and the requirement to be flexible in our educational systems. That doesn't mean we reduce quality. That doesn't mean we change our assessments. It just means that we have to become more flexible and innovative, because as VC firms will tell you, if you're not growing, you will be going. There are questions. Do we need 4,000 universities and colleges in the United States?
Wow,
that's a lot of universities and colleges that are out there. Do they need to become more efficient? Do the laws of supply and demand inevitably dictate that? And if there's anything we've learned from history, it definitely will happen. And it'll always happen faster than you think.
How can we go about solving the skill gap issue in the United States?
I think we need to get young people who are talented. I will call it the hidden talent. One of the things we know from Workforce Opportunity Services, or as we call it WOS, is that there are incredible amounts of supply of talent, but it needs to be nurtured in a certain way that talent can actually work at very competitive prices, that there is, without question, the needs for those types of people to be working. Not everything that's outsourced would I'd like to outsource. So we need to dig into those populations and areas and provide a systemic type of growth for these individuals. Some of them may have to go to work right away and go to school part-time, which is the WOS model. Some of them maybe will only spend a year or two in college and then have to work and finish up part-time. All of these flexible kinds of things have to work together to have a successful ecosystems. Some people will read the great books in their 30s. Not everybody will be able to read it when they're 21. And we need to produce better delivery systems to allow these individuals to operate. And you can't ignore the economic pressures on these societies. They're incredible. One of the things we have in WOS is a research platform. We have an instrument that I've developed that measures readiness for the workplace of underserved populations. Little tiny things like not having enough money to get on a subway could be crucial to failure. And if you look at the playing field today, universities can't help you there. And neither can corporations. So we need to re-examine what I would call a new supply chain. Because my colleague Peter Capelli would say to you, which he wrote in the Harvard Business Review a number of years ago, that the supply chains that organizations are using resemble a 1950 psychology.
Interesting.
All right? Which is, tell me what you want, I'll produce it, and I'll then roll it out. Well, we're living in a world that is more sense and respond. Sense an opportunity, go after it, take a risk, deliver it. If it doesn't work, move on. I think our education systems have to look at that. We may be in a world that not every program on a campus has a long life. And if you look at the way academia works today, that is not instilled at all. We look at a program, we look at it some more, we launch it, and by the time we launch it, much of the ingredients in any kind of skill base is already obsolete. It's been known for years that so many of the things we teach, even though they're good and they represent knowledge, they do not necessarily meet the needs of a company that needs you to walk in with knowledge.
So how do you think that we can actually leverage technology to drive learning outcomes?
As I've said it in a jokingly way, after careful review of the Bible, I'm convinced now that the technology people shall indeed inherit the earth. I mean, it is the basis of everything that is going on right now, and technology has its problems with what we've seen in society today, but we also know when used well, it can drive everything, all right? That doesn't mean we should forget about the things that we do as social animals that we are, as social beings, but where is the balance of those two? And we need great educators to really work on this, because the human factor is still a very important thing in our lives. Where is the balance of those? We tend to react in societies in a pendulum. We go from one extreme to another.
So true.
Yes, and the thing I can relate it to, of course, is the database world. We had relational database, and then we had object databases, and what do we have today? Object relational databases. So we're going to have that type of thing that comes together, but we have to begin to understand what global education means. We have to begin to understand where education continually happens, and what do we mean by certifications and degrees. What do we mean by skills? And how do we recognize those different things? And how do we deal with the incredible amounts of knowledge that is overwhelming us on the web? I mean, how do I grasp all the information and become mature at that?